Starting with challenges and questions, it's a matter of identifying who needs to be involved in the discussion, who's making decisions, who's affected by those decisions, talking about, well, what are alternatives we face? What if such and such happens? What if we respond in this way versus that way? And based on those types of questions about the future, we need to be informed by evidence and analysis. That can be very informal analysis, or it could be much more complicated and formal analysis. The process doesn't end there. It may take, as earlier speakers have said, it might take repeated cycles before we reach a point where we're comfortable making recommendations and decisions. The quality of those decisions will, of course, depend on what was the extent of the engagement of those involved in making the decision, and how were they informed? What evidence, what analysis went into that process? So these can take many different forms. This could be a matter of an individual farmer thinking about what types of seeds she's going to plant, or how much, or when she'll plant them, and keeping in mind, what will happen with the rains this year. Will they be on time? Will they be late? Will they fail entirely? What will happen to the price of the crop that I'm going to produce, or the inputs that I'm going to use? So she thinks about all of those questions as she makes decisions at the beginning of a season. Or it could involve a community thinking about how to allocate water in a dry period. Or that same community thinking about investing in an improved irrigation system for future dry periods. So all types of different scales. It could involve a CGIAR center, or a broader research program, a national agricultural ministry. All of them looking at different types of questions, different time scales, different geographic and social scales as well. But all of those need to be informed by evidence and analysis of some kind, as I said, whether it's informal or more formal. In terms of looking ahead a decade, 2 or 3 decades, at some of the challenges that I put on the previous slide, we need to rely on more complicated methods as one input into this process. And that's what I'd like to talk about in the presentation today, looking specifically at some of the data and models that can be used to help as an input into this type of process. And I've lost my signal again.
Maybe I can help you.
I can just use the, oh. Can I just use the, yeah. Let me just use the arrow key, that's fine. Okay, so what I'd like to do is describe some work that we're currently doing under something called the Global Futures and Strategic Foresight program. It's an initiative of the CGIAR led by IFPRI with these 4 broad objectives: improving modeling tools, developing a stronger community of practice, exploring alternative futures in order to inform decisions, both within the CGIAR and among our partners. And I'll spend a moment on each of those 4 objectives and then provide an example with the case of climate change. So given the complexity of the challenges we face, we need tools to help us understand climate, water, how crops will respond, economic interactions, and there are others as well. So we have a set of models that we try and use in an integrated manner. That set is increasing as different challenges and different questions arise, but the general goal is to trace through these different linkages among these different variables, come up with estimates at the national and at the global scale in terms of production, consumption, trade, and so forth, of about 60 agricultural commodities, and then use those results in turn to look further at the implications on the environment, or on food security, or on other variables of interest. The community of practice that is currently involved in this exercise includes all 15 of the CGIAR centers, and we collaborate with other global economic modeling groups through the Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project, or AGMIP. These include universities, national research centers, and so forth. Oops. We do this in order to explore alternative futures. We're not talking about a single future that we're trying to predict. We're looking at different possible futures given different assumptions about how drivers will affect the future and how our responses will also affect that. We can look at that through lenses of different technologies, different regions, different commodities of interest to different CGIAR centers. We've also worked with the private sector, in this case, the large-scale insurance industry, Lloyd's Insurance Group, which is interested in possible implications of long-term shocks or short-term shocks that are climate related. And this, in fact, food system shocks, is the report that Martin Kropf referred to in his plenary presentation yesterday afternoon. So to just take a quick look at the example of climate. There are a number of models out there. We don't run the climate models. We take inputs from those models as part of our analysis. But you're all probably familiar with maps like this. Most of the models agree in general about the broad trends in temperature in the coming decades. And it's not a very optimistic picture. By contrast, looking at precipitation, the models have quite different projections. This is one from the Hadley Center in the UK. It projects, looking out to 2050, a wetter future for Southern Africa in particular, whereas many of the other models actually project drier conditions, which are closer to what the region is experiencing this year as a result of El Nino. But as a result of that variation in the models, we need to look at multiple models in order to try and understand the range of possible impacts that we might see in the future. In any case, continuing with this one example, we can use the inputs from those climate models, or use the outputs from those climate models as inputs into crop modeling. And this is an example for the case of rain-fed maize, looking at the impacts on yields around the world critically, and this is in 2050, before economic responses. So this is in effect if we imposed future climate on today's production systems. And it's given by all of the red you see in the map. It's a sobering picture. However, it's important to note, again, this is before adjustments made by farmers. Each one of these pixels includes hundreds, if not thousands, of individual farmers, each of whom is making their own decision based on that type of generic process I outlined in an earlier slide, looking at how conditions change, how they might respond, what the possible implications of their responses might be. And so we need to consider how their changes in response also interact with each other at a larger scale. And when we do that, we can look at how those climate impacts on cereal yields compare to the case of no climate change. So this is for cereals as a group, and looking at different regions here. So we've got world, East Asia, Pacific, Europe, and so forth, over to sub-Saharan Africa on the right. What we see in the gray is the projected change in yields between today and 2050 in the absence of climate change, just based on improvements in technology, infrastructure, and so forth. And we can see, for example, at the global level, about a 40% increase projected in cereal yields as an aggregate. And then the dots represent different degrees of climate change, from the blue meaning less climate change to the red implying a greater degree of climate change by 2050. And the simple message here is, of course, that the impacts vary a lot. Some regions, higher latitudes, Europe and former Soviet Union, see actual improvements in yields as a result of climate change, whereas other regions, North America, South Asia, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, show decreases in yields even once economic responses are added onto the initial biophysical shocks. We can trace that on through to a number of other variables: prices, trade, and in this case, a measure of food insecurity, population at risk of hunger. The gray bars here represent numbers, millions of people who are hungry or at risk of hunger today. And that corresponds very roughly to the FAO's measure that they report annually in the State of Food Insecurity report. About 800 million people worldwide today undernourished. The blue represents progress that could be projected under one particular scenario by 2050 in the absence of climate change. And looking particularly at sub-Saharan Africa here, we see even with quite extensive population growth, sorry about this, a projected decline in the number undernourished in the absence of climate change of about 60 million people, but about half of that gain is lost as a result of climate change under this particular scenario. So we're not left simply at the mercy of these large drivers. There's things that we can do, and particularly agricultural research can do, in terms of improved technologies, improved management practices, policies, and investments. We don't have time today to go into these in detail, but suffice to say that we can put different improvements like this into the scenarios and see what the impacts of things like this could be played out into the future on things like prices, production, consumption, food security, and other indicators of interest. So the net goal of all of these things is to inform decisions, whether it be within the CGIAR, national, regional, or international partners, not just today or this year, but by building capacity so that they have the ability to use similar tools in their own decision making over the longer term. So I'll just conclude by repeating, we're not talking about predicting one future or the future. There are many futures that are possible, partly because of the uncertainty inherent in all of these drivers, and partly because those outcomes depend critically on choices that we make today and in the coming years. So understanding those choices requires input from many different disciplines, areas of expertise, stakeholders, institutions, and so forth. And in order to do that, we have some tools to offer, but look forward very much to working with partners from across GCARD who represent other areas of expertise and other groups of stakeholders. So thanks to the organizers and also to our partners in the Global Futures and Strategic Foresight program. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. We'll take questions, I think, at the end of the session. So, Jenny, if we could have you to speak next, please, that would be great. And the next presentation loaded. Yep. Here we go, Jenny.
Hi. How do I do it? Let's see.
There's this one to take it forward, and that's the one.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
Could you introduce yourself?
Would you introduce yourself first, Henry?
Okay, yes. Well, as I said earlier, I'm Jenny Data-Pryke, and a large part of my career has been with FAO in rural poverty, livelihoods, institutions, cooperatives, participation, and so on. But since I retired, like one of our other colleagues, I've not taken retirement very easily, so I'm still working part-time or sometimes for nothing to have fun. I hope you heard all that. In fact, it's lucky that I had gone out for a minute, because it's better that Keith's presentation came first. So I'm really glad. He's been talking at a more macro level, and he's given you a lot of information about Foresight. So I want to go down more now to a micro level. And this is work that is in progress. It's going to be discussed, the Foresight issue is being discussed in theme 5, and I hope that our chair and co-chairs here will liaise with their counterparts in theme 5, because obviously this needs to be put together in the outcome statement. So I'm talking specifically about gender in Foresight. Now, the objective of my talk is to hopefully agree on some collective actions under theme 3, where we could incorporate gender into Foresight work. We would need to develop and scale out the concepts, the methods, and the capacities to do this work, because they're really in a very fledgling state. And also, yes, to develop the capacities and actions at all levels to ensure gender equity and empowerment. And obviously we all know gender equity and empowerment are part of the SDGs. They also are very important in the CGIAR strategic framework. So I think everyone buys into that as a value. Specifically, what I would hope that could come out of this week is for a few people who are interested to get together to form a sort of ad hoc working group, partnership, whatever, to actually pilot some of this at a field level. And I could imagine that it could take place in one or two of the integrated sites of some of the CRPs in different regions. But we can think about that. Now, why is gender important? The women actually represent globally 43% of the agricultural labor force. But in a number of countries and regions, it's way over that. Can even be 60 or 70%. We're also finding feminization of labor in a lot of countries and regions. This is often because of male-out migration, often abroad or to the cities. Sometimes it's to non-farm rural jobs which are paid better. This is happening even in the Near East, where we tend to think of women as secluded. But there are a whole lot of Near Eastern countries where women are actually representing 60 or 70% of the labor force. I'm talking about countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, and so on. The problem is that although women are doing all this work, there are gender inequalities in access to land and other resources, to information, finance, markets, services. And women the world over don't have the voice that men have. I mean, even in this room today, you must have noticed that most of the speakers have been men, with just 2 exceptions so far. The problem is that this has a huge cost in terms of women's lost production and their lost income. But that's really important because we know that women, more than men, do the cooking, the food preparation, and they're the guardians of food security and nutrition. And we know also this sound evidence that when women earn more money, they tend to spend it on food and education for the kids, clothes for the kids, whereas men often see it as their money and they spend it on often things that have nothing to do with the family. But there's evidence on this. I mean, I'm just saying this. But then we don't want to look at it only in economic terms. There's also an issue of human rights and justice, towards women. All right, now, what I found 2 years ago at a meeting in ICARD on the Dryden systems, which had people from all over the CG system and outside, and my friend here was facilitating this, Jorgen, a lot of people didn't actually know what gender meant. They kept thinking it meant women, and it doesn't. Now, the term to describe the biological differences between men and women is sex, okay? And when you fill in you tick your thing at the airport, when you come in, they ask you what your sex is, you're male or you're female. Now, gender does not mean women. It's often used to mean women, but it doesn't. Gender is not a biological term. Gender is a social term, and it refers to social roles and identities that we have as male or female. But because they're social, they vary. They vary by culture. They vary within countries, within cultures even. And the gender relations also bring up issues of social power and social relations, social power. And this is within the family, it's within the community, it's within wider societies, it's within cooperatives, it's within governments, and it's within this room even. Now, as I said, the gender roles and relations are culture and context specific, but they do change. And I'm sure each one of you could think of changes, even in your own lifetime, that you've observed in gender roles, whether it's in your family or in your community and so on. It's also not helpful if we just talk about men on the one hand and women on the other hand. We need to disaggregate much more among these. We need to look first at different socioeconomic class. Often a woman from a rich landowning family will have more in common with men from other landowning families than a woman who's maybe a land laborer. Occupation, ethnicity, marital status, age, as you said earlier. Young men have different opportunities, often better opportunities than young women. And our colleague here from Senegal, explained she had to have a delay in her PhD work because she had a baby. All right? These are gender issues. Age is also important, because one thing that didn't come out in the presentation this morning on decision making that I would have liked to mention is that stakeholder group had an old man, a man with a briefcase, and a woman and a child. But where was the grandmother? You see, in many societies, even in Europe, it's the grandmothers who are bringing the children up while the mothers are out working. And the grandmothers are often not being reached by the so-called ICT or other media. Okay, it's really important. And as I said, we need to look at the roles, gender roles within households. And in research methodology, it doesn't help just to compare male-headed households with female-headed households. The reasons for the differences often have nothing to do with gender at all. A female-headed household can actually be quite rich if the man is abroad earning lots of money and sending her remittances. I mean, it's much more complicated than that. Now, let me just see, sorry. Yes, those are some of the conceptual issues. Now, some methodological issues. We need to actually include rural men and women themselves in the Foresight. We can't do it for them. We can't guess what they want. We have to actually have them involved, so they're owners of the process. They're experts too. And we need to use a variety of qualitative and quantitative methods, and we have to find culturally appropriate ways of getting women to voice their preferences, priorities, and needs. We know from studies that men and women often do have different preferences and priorities and needs and values and attitudes to risk. C4, for example, has done quite a lot of work on this because trees take a long time to grow. They're much more forward-looking, I think, than some of the other centers. And they've done some very good studies on this that show men and women have different priorities. We also need to look at this in the context of what are the changing social norms that are going on, and the way they affect female empowerment, disempowerment, and voice. And there are also ethical questions, because in this participatory foresight at a community level, if we have outsiders, whether one's an agronomist or a socioeconomist or whatever, one is changing already the dynamics, and this has to be thought through. Now, there are promising developments, and I think some of this is actually going to be discussed in theme 5, unfortunately, where they're discussing some studies that have done this. But there are better ways of doing this and identifying the conflicts, the synergies, the trade-offs in developing these different alternative futures, as Keith said. And we are getting also some promising guidelines and tools for addressing the gender aspects. And so far, the ones I've seen have mainly come out of C4. Now, what we're suggesting is that if a few people are interested in this group, in group 5 and others, would be to set up this small group that would actually try to do some of this on the ground. Now, I'd like to start backwards, which would be the bottom one, to actually carry out a few pilot tests in some of the integrated sites of the CG system, or with universities or other organizations. And it would be, in order to convince stakeholders and decision makers why it's needed and how we're going to inform policy afterwards. And to do it, we would also need to test and disseminate these concepts, methods, and tools. And we would have to have some capacity building in that to do it properly. Now, these are some questions to you. Oh, by the way, I do have a concept note that still needs some more inputs into it, but anyone who's interested, I can give them a hard copy, or I can send it electronically, because I believe in participation, and I'd like ownership of this. So some questions to you. Are you interested in joining such a group? What sort of experience would you bring to it? What would you like to learn? Because we're all learning in this together. What specific issues would you like the group to address? with whom, for whom, why, and what specific activities would you like to do? I mean, this could be developing a commodity, it could be looking at a farming system, it could be looking at water problems. I mean, there are all sorts of things one could do. And then what's really important is how could we disseminate the good practices? How could we celebrate successes together to share them? And is any funding available? If not, how do we get it? So I think that's the end of the presentation. So I'll leave you with the questions then.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jenny. Hold on to your questions. We'll come back to them at the end of the session. So our next speaker is John Kennelly from the University of Alberta. I think John introduced himself earlier. I've had the pleasure of interacting with John on a number of occasions in his native Ireland, and look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Wayne. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And all I need is the clicker, I guess. This is... okay. So the topic that I've been given this afternoon is virtual labs. And I became involved because an email appeared in my inbox a few weeks ago from the program committee, and it asked this question. And this question was actually not directed at me. I was being asked as the messenger to contact Lauren Babiok, who is the Vice President of Research at the University of Alberta, and who has been working a lot in Africa during his career, especially in the animal health area and vaccine development. So Wayne, our Lauren, unfortunately was unable to attend. His passport actually was in for renewal. So I agreed to maybe present the question to you, not claiming to be an expert in this area, but the expertise will come from you. So I'll be very brief. So the background is that developing funding cycles are short, and specific projects may require analytical capabilities that are not available locally. And so often the attempt would be to try and build that local capacity, but in doing so, the challenge, especially if there's equipment involved and so on, that it's often very difficult to source it within the time constraints. There are bureaucratic considerations, at university level, at national borders and so on, and getting equipment in. So how does one achieve the project objectives while at the same time contribute to whatever the project development capacity had in mind? And so a question to you then, your thoughts on what models might be useful. And so I just wanted to mention the Canadian International Food Security Research Fund, because I had the opportunity to participate in one of those projects. And what I liked about this particular model is that it involves a partner at least two partners, and one of them has to be a Canadian partner, and the other partner has to be in the developing country. So it brings together the expertise, in this case of a Canadian university, with the developing initiative. And where possible, of course, the laboratory work is done locally, but if this is not possible, there are provisions for that work to be done back at the Canadian university. And one project, and I think was mentioned in the opening session this morning, was the APM project, which is alleviating poverty and malnutrition in India. And this is a project that was in collaboration with the Swaminathan Foundation, and looking at the impact of particular practices in terms of nutritional security, and testing out different interventions and to see how successful they were. And then the idea would be to replicate those work more broadly across India. Sorry, just to finish on this one, one of the things that struck me as this project was underway was that it provided a great opportunity for our Canadian students to spend time in India, and this is both at the undergraduate and graduate level, and also for Indian students to come to the University of Alberta either on short projects, and some of them actually came to complete a master's and PhD. So this concept then of using a development project to engage young people and to provide for capacity development in young people seemed to be very admirable. Another project that's currently underway that Lauren Babiok is directly involved in is this idea of heat-stable vaccines that are involved with multiple diseases, and working with with partners in Africa, where some of the basic work had been done at the U of A, and the development work, and including the development of the vaccine, especially at low cost, would be done in Africa. So I guess the final slide that I wanted to mention, what I try and summarize what I've gained from talking to Lauren and thinking about this, is that if we could see these development projects as really an opportunity to build the capacity development that we've already recognized in terms of development of young people in developing countries, and to build that capacity development as part of the objective of the project, that the project is not just about producing a vaccine, or the project is about some particular research on the agronomy side, that it's also designed to develop the capacity, the human capacity in the developing country. The challenge that we faced in the project that I've been involved in is that the funding agency doesn't actually cover that very well. It considers to be an add-on to the project, so you have to find other sources of funding to do it. And what I'm suggesting, to get the discussion going, is that if that is built in as an actual outcome of the project, that we might achieve a lot more in connecting north and south, and in building the needed capacity in developing countries. So Wayne, that's just to get the discussion going. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So the last presenter in this session is David Spielman from IFPRI in Washington. And the title of David's presentation is Science, Food and Society, Charting Our Future Role of Science Policy in Developing Country Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Wayne. It's hard to try to fit what I was thinking about originally when we started talking about this panel into what's gone on throughout this theme during the day, but I'll give it a shot. And I know I stand between you and coffee. So where's my slide? So there we go. So as scientists and researchers, we're asked to contribute to three, I think, very respectable goals, right? Agricultural productivity growth, environmental sustainability, and human and social welfare improvement. We're asked to do so, as you all know, in the context of increasing weather volatility, extreme climate events, and long-term climate change, growing competition for land, water, and biodiversity, and demographic pressures such as persistently high population growth rates, aging populations, large-scale migration movements, and complex and new disease burdens. So to date, in the CGIAR, sorry.
Excuse me, David, we've been asked if you could move to one side so that they can record the presentation.
Oh, that's probably a good idea.
So
I should scooch. So I'll stand here, how's that? But to date, our strategy has been fairly straightforward and fairly simple. We've used science and technologies as the driver of change, right? Improved cultivars, synthetic fertilizers, improved animal breeds and vaccines, better management practices for crop, livestock, water, land, biodiversity, and ecosystems, and public policies, investments, and markets to incentivize technological change. It's a very simple theory of change, but it's worked very well for us for 40 years. But today, by many accounts, that technology-first strategy is the subject of intense contestation. The space around science, food, and society is hotly debated at every level. There are science solutions, you could say, in the pipeline that may never see the light of day in our field of agriculture and food. Not only biotechnology and genetic modification, but new things such as CRISPR-Cas9 and other gene editing tools, synthetic biology, nanotechnology, many other things. We may as well close them down, any scientific inquiry now, if we don't better understand this space of contestation. And we're missing out on it. I think we're at an inflection point in history where we are truly missing out on debates that need to happen about new technological solutions. So, and I've left my ticker back here. I've only got 2 or 3 slides. One of the ways that we can address this is by making the best use possible of scientific evidence, both the hard sciences and the social sciences, of course. And one of the questions is, are we really doing that today? I think we need to take much more seriously the use of scientific evidence in how we work, in how we promote new ideas, and how we support decision-making, especially in government around policy issues. I believe that we don't practice as much as we preach. There are a lot of technologies, a lot of science out there that I deal with on a daily basis in the CGIAR that's really not well supported by scientific evidence. There are new cultivars out there being promoted by various centers where I can't find a single published bit of information on their yield potential or the range of their yield potential under different agroecological, in agroecological zones and whatnot. There are lots of examples of really exciting new technologies that haven't been put to the scientific test. Just to name a few, urea deep placement. It's a classic. Systems of rice intensification. Again, there's some good agronomic work there, but the social and economic impact work doesn't exist. Conservation agriculture, there's been a lot of talk about that, and where it's been well documented, that's great. In a lot of other places, it's being promoted wildly. People like Ken Giller and all have written extensively about how the poor versions of the science are out there in the field and in farmers' lives. So I think we need a much more systematic and methodological approach to the questions at hand. We need to constantly look back, of course, retrospectively. And by that I mean working more on our ex post impact evaluation work, improving the rigor and the sensitivity of our analysis with better identification strategies. That's something that I, as an economist, do a lot of work on in the field and enjoy immensely. We need to be looking forward, of course, to more plausible scenarios. The work that my colleague Keith Wiebe presented to you just about 20 minutes ago is a good example of that. Eka from ICRAF, who was here earlier, also presented some foresighting work. Developing those models and integrating them with more and more micro-level data, as we were talking about with respect to gender and respect to other social issues, I think is a great way to move these models. And that's exactly what we're doing in IFPRI and other places. But I think we also need to be looking a lot deeper into the structure, conduct, and performance of our global innovation system around food and agriculture. The devil is in the details. This is where I think we really need to allocate a greater share of our resources in the research community. Let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean by looking deeper. First, I think we need to be cognizant, much more cognizant, of the policies and institutions that shape the use of technology. That is the enabling environment. We talk about that word all the time. The enabling environment that supports scientific inquiry and technological change. For most of us, that should mean, especially in this community, digging deeper into things such as policies around genetic resources, genetic resource use, conservation, and exchange, intellectual property rights, competition policy and antitrust, access and benefit sharing issues, regulations on seed and planting material. Not only registration, but also certification, quality assurance, and things such as that. Public performance incentives for researchers and extension agents. It's a vast area of research that we don't touch on, but it's critical, and it's being done in the health and education fields as we speak. And of course, decision support tools for R&D investments, things that we talked about earlier. We need to develop our capacity to iterate, learn, and innovate through a progression of scientific discovery, delivery, development and delivery. That's a part of what we do, but we need to really understand what it takes to get through an entire cycle iteratively, to bring something to farmers or bring something into the market, and to learn from the failures along the way. And we need to better define our core strategies around investment, collaboration, and risk management. And I can't say enough about risk management. We, especially in the CGIAR, are pretty terrible at understanding risk management, right? We put something out there, and we say, hey, we've got the solution. And when no one adopts, when it fails in a farmer's field, we say, well, we hadn't planned for that. I'm not sure what to do. Risk management is a very complex field, but it's something that we can develop greater expertise on and understanding. And I think Eka's presentation earlier today put a very fine point on risk, modeling risk under uncertainty. Things like that are really essential to what we do and how we develop strategies going forward. In short, while science, technology, and innovation can contribute to solving problems in developing country agriculture, The solutions require more than just good science. We all know that, and we've come a long way in GCARD and in the CGIAR and GFAR and in our entire community recognizing the importance of innovation writ largely. Now we need to start developing the right tools and the technologies, plus the right policies and investments, and the right strategies for investment, collaboration, and risk management. We have to get out of our project mode of thinking, out of our small program and center mode of thinking. We have to put CRP proposals away, stop chasing after funds as our sole reason for being, and start looking at these big picture issues. And I'll just leave it there for discussion.
Thank you very much, David. And if you'd stay out here, and if I could ask all the speakers to come to the front, please, and we'll take a couple of chairs here so that we can then invite your questions from all of the speakers. Yep. So while the speakers are getting assembled, I just thought that I would start opening up the floor for comments. We've had 4 very interesting presentations touching on the whole issue of innovation, touching on the whole issue of capacity development, but also on the issues around the need to be able to better understand risk, providing a solid evidence base for decision making, and also foresight analysis and gender. So the floor is open. What are your questions?
Hi, I'm Jürgen Hackmann. I've got a few questions. First of all, foresight. I hear a lot, you see a lot of climate change maps, etc., etc. I see very little about societal development projections. And I mean, in other fora, we talk mainly about rural transformation and what all that is. I don't hear that here. Why? Because that has a massive input to how our food systems and, will look like in future. So that's one. Also institutionally, in other fora we talk about deinstitutionalization, de-intermediarization, which have massive inputs also on your universities and everything else. I mean, really future things, what will probably happen. I don't hear about that. Our foresight is pretty close in my eyes, what I see here. So, question, what are we doing with that? The other bit, sorry.
How many questions have you got?
Another one.
Okay, make this the last one. I want to
Yeah, no, for gender. I'm just surprised, you know, in the recent years I hear again and again male and female-headed households. My very first survey in 1989 was about male de facto and de jure female-headed households. It was already clear, and that is now 26 years ago, that it's not about male and female-headed households, it's about other things. So why are we bringing this back?
They're still doing it.
The second one, we still had gender analysis, even in foresight. When are we moving to gender negotiation? When you mentioned change of roles, norms, etc., etc. By analysis, we don't do that, and we're not making progress. The last one, my major fear of all that are the male 18 to 35-year-old people. Unemployed, hopeless. These are the real threats for society. Where do they occur in our gender approaches?
Okay, thanks, Jürgen. Very provocative questions. Who would like to start? Jenny, do you want to kick off?
Well,
And are we trying to get the other questions ready?
okay, I'm going to talk about the gender. For example, I've got it, I've referenced it in my concept note. There is a recent study by some CG system, I can look it up, the reference, and they are still making in Foresight, and they have made the distinction between male and female-headed households. And this is like 1 year ago or 2 years ago. They're still doing it. You know, you knew this long ago, but there are people who are still being senior scientists in the CG system who still don't know this. I wasn't quite sure about your point about gender analysis. I've been looking for documents and studies that incorporate gender into foresight studies, and I've hardly found anything at all. So if you know of things, if anyone knows of things, please give me these references, because I'm in my concept paper, and those of you who are interested can have a copy. I've done a table where I put in a few studies that I've found, I put in the title, I mean the author, the title, and all that. And do they distinguish between men and women as homogeneous categories, if they address gender or not, etc., etc.? And then I'm writing up more detail in the annex. In fact, the one that I told you about, where they still distinguishing between male and female headed, is an IFPRI study by Anderson et al., 2014. Okay.
Okay. Was it, Keith, did you want to?
Yes, on societal developments, rural transformation, and so forth. Absolutely, those are critical. There are two things we can do about that. One is to try and do a better job within the model, which is really difficult. These are tools that have certain strengths and certain limitations, and there's some things which they're not able to consider. However, we can also link to other models that do a better job of that. And for example, right now, we don't have income distribution or rural versus urban distinction, but we can link to other models that do that. The other thing is just to always keep these kinds of analyses and results in the context of other approaches that do a better job of that, so that the scenarios that we put into the model are informed by that kind of discussion, and that the results that come out of this model can feed into that. But not to, I mean, to limit expectations about what this kind of analysis can offer. It's one part of a puzzle, but that's a good example. Gender is another one where we recognize the importance of it. We can't handle that within the model right now, but we can be very conscious of that in terms of thinking about the scenarios that we ask of the model, and in terms of interpreting the results that come out of it. But always it has to be informed by other sources of expertise and analysis.
Thanks, Keith. Margie, did you have a question? There's one there, and then one here. Is there a mic going to the back? Have they had a mic somewhere?
Thanks very much. Maggie Gill, Chair of the Independent Science and Partnership Council, and from the look of the emerging framework document for the CGIAR, about to have rather more responsibility for foresight and prioritisation than I might ever have dreamed of or wanted. I came to this session particularly to get an answer to a question that's been bothering me since Stan Wood produced a paper, I think led a paper, I think in 2010, no, maybe it was slightly later, but it was criticising all the previous foresight exercises that had been done on food security because they hadn't extended beyond the production sufficiently, beyond the production system into the whole food system. And I was really pleased, therefore, and actually I was going to raise something earlier in the presentation from ICRAF about decision analysis. Because for me, one of the key things about that decision analysis is getting the right people in the room, sufficiently broad to be able to deal with the unintended consequences. And I thought David's mention at the end of taking us into that whole risk management strategy and thinking beyond just agriculture. And I think that, to me, is where we need to go in terms of foresight. And so my question is very much about how do we get the right, you could go to infinity in terms of the number of people to actually ask. But I have yet to see a paper or a recommendation about how you strategically make sure you've got the absolutely key people in the room when you're going to some of these things like foresight. So it's probably a question for David in relation to that, because he was the one that sort of took us into that area. Thanks.
Let him answer the question, and then we'll come back to you. Yeah.
Probably take a few other questions. Well, I'm not the foresight expert here. I don't actually do much work on foresight. In fact, most of the work I concentrate on is much more micro, looking at the issues you raised, gender, income distribution, things like that. But I will say this: I think that the foresight modeling we do, and a lot of the scenario analysis we do, is precisely designed to expand our ability to understand risk, or those probability distributions that go around a given technology or a given policy scenario or a given agroecology, and of course climate change scenarios. So maybe I can kick it to Keith to talk a little bit more about the point.
Yeah, Maggie, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question either, other than that we confront it. It's a real challenge for us. Thinking back to the sort of circular diagram I had with the arrow providing input from these data and models, it is an input, but it's useful only to the extent that you have the right people in the rest of that discussion. And we've faced this challenge in the CGIAR, where this particular program I talked about, Global Futures and Strategic Foresight, the original vision was that it would actually do a very specific job of informing prioritization. But we found, A, that technically we're not there, and B, institutionally, we're probably even farther from being there, because you have to have that collective ownership and buy-in to the whole process in order for people to find the results credible. We have found that it has been more successful at the level of individual centers, where they know their constituency, they have a budget, they know who's making the decisions. And within that scope, they are therefore more confident in saying, yes, we can use this to distinguish. For example, ICRISAT has done this in looking at drought and heat tolerant groundnuts in West Africa and South Asia. That's something that's within their scope. They're comfortable. They can take the results and put them against other sources of information that they have. But when we look across commodities and across regions and so forth, it's a much wider constituency, and I don't know how to get there, other than that it does take dialogue, it does take iteration and back and forth, and therefore it does take, at a minimum, patience, and hopefully more than that, a willingness to engage in that process over an extended period until it eventually converges on something that people have confidence in.
Thanks, Keith. Jenny, did you want to respond very quickly, because we've got another question here?
Yes, just quickly. What I suggest is Maggie tries to talk to Robin Bourgeois, who's in theme 3. He's been doing quite a lot of participatory foresight at a community level. He's been doing some with WorldFish and with C4, and also there's a lady going to talk from Cameroon who's been a partner in this. And what they basically do is they often have one group of women discussing their visions for the future and their scenario building. They have a group of men, and they have a group of youth. And when they've got these different scenarios, then they get the whole lot together, and then they can the whole group, men, women, youth, look at the different scenarios together, and they start to discuss trade-off synergies, and eventually they come up with some sort of common win-win. This is the way that they're trying to do it at a grassroots. It can work at a village level, it can work at a landscape level. You could have this going on in several villages or areas. Yeah, it's local. But a lot of the CGIAR research is local.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Well, thank you very much. I wanted to use the opportunity to just make a comment about what John said during his presentation. And I will illustrate that example by a personal story quickly. In 1992-93, when I was working on my master's thesis in Nigeria, I wanted to separate blood proteins in goats for my master's thesis. In the whole of Nigeria, I couldn't find starch gel. I had the money to buy it, but I couldn't find it. I ended up using cellulose acetate paper to do my electrophoresis. Then I eventually left to do my PhD at Texas A&M. I've been at Cornell for many years now. 3 days ago, we launched a company. We just launched the first e-commerce platform to sell reagents and supplies in West Africa. I did that because 24 years later, when I came back home to Nigeria, you still couldn't find starch gel. And so it started becoming, no, something is wrong with the system. This was even before the days of the internet when I was trying to do this. Now there's internet. Logistics is a lot easier. And so the project you were describing in India, our vision is that if something like that was going to happen in a place like Nigeria or West Africa now, we're putting things in place. So Africa Biosciences is what we're calling this company. We're currently raising money. We've already raised about $300,000 from founders and friends. We're going to investors. I'll leave all the details out. But the point I want to make in this forum is that part of changing the game to develop scientific capacity in Africa is creating a space for the private sector. That is completely missing. Research is government-driven and donor-dependent, and it's extremely, profoundly dysfunctional, and it hasn't worked very well. And so we're also building a lab in Ibadan, not too far from our ITA, which will be completely commercial and will provide a platform for genomics, proteomics, bioinformatics, and so on and so forth. We decided to take the bull by the horns.
John, did you want to comment quickly? And then I think Alan and this.
Except to agree that obviously the private sector increasingly has a greater role to play. But fundamentally, whether it's the private sector or the university sector, government, whatever, you need to empower the young people in the particular country or whatever so that they take charge and are the agents of change in the future. And so they have to be given that opportunity. That was the point I was trying to make.
Yes. Thanks, John. Alan, you have a quick question?
Quick question to David, Alain Vidal, CGIAR Consortium. Well, David, thank you for bringing this picture, which might be painful, on questioning us to ourselves on what we should consider in our research. I think the risk component you mentioned is particularly important because more than before, or we operate less in a bubble than before as researchers, as research organization. We are connected to the world, and people, including our taxpayers who are financing our public research, are watching us. And so anything we do is exposed, has a consequence. And we had a good example with climate smart agriculture where we all embarked. We keep saying it's a good thing, which is now being criticized by more than 30 NGOs, not only the Alliance on Climate Smart Agriculture, but the climate smart agriculture itself, just because some private sector companies pretend they're also doing climate smart agriculture. So I think that's a key element, including on the other techniques and emerging techniques that you mentioned, to keep in mind.
Don't fight over the mic. I've got another one here.
Right,
you go first, and then you go after it, if you don't mind.
Right.
Okay? And then we'll finish after that.
Okay, thanks very much. I've got a question for John, which really builds on the earlier point. I think the virtual labs idea is a very interesting one. It recognises the pragmatic realities of grant funding and capability, but I think we've got to guard against a trap of making sure that our partners are not just data gatherers, but we build the capabilities to do high throughput genomic, proteomic analysis, to do the bioinformatics over the longer term, so that we don't allow the pragmatic to overcome the need to build capacity in innovation systems. But it's not just about the supply of equipment and reagents. I've been in that business for 20 years of my career. It's about making sure that the long-term service capability is there to support that equipment, so that you don't end up with very high-priced, shiny bits of equipment being non-functional in laboratories.
Okay. Any comments, John, or the gentleman there with a question? Why don't you continue? I can comment. Okay. Maybe you can pick this up after the session as well with coffee.
Yeah, my question is on the modeling. And someone talked about public trust of science. The models we see on climate change are very simple. Temperature goes by this goes down by this. Well, we've seen emerging and recurring diseases which are so devastating. For example, here in South Africa, the whitefly, we have detected new 5 viruses, which has never been seen before. And they're causing damage to potatoes, tomatoes, paper, with huge export potential. So these models, where is diseases? Is it imposed, or is it just a thumb up thing like temperature 2%, rainfall drop by this drops by this? And some of the policymakers are starting to mistrust us with our models because they terrify them and sometimes they are not to the mark. Thank you.
Keith, you want to respond, and then we'll try and wrap up.
Yes, what I presented about climate change was a subset of the type of impacts that you're talking about. I mean, pests and diseases, those are not in here. Variability in extreme events, those are not in here. Rising sea level, not in here. Melting glaciers, not in here. These are just from the changes in trends in temperature and precipitation. So it's a limited view It's a partial view of those impacts. Those are things that we would like to do a better job of. The Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project that I mentioned has a working group on pests and diseases specifically to try and address that gap. We won't do that modeling, but we would be very interested in the results of that so that we can add that and have a slightly more complete picture of a very complicated set of issues.